Hello, my name is Billie J. Wonderwood. I'm one of the Baldwin County Commissioners. I'm actually from District 3, which is the central Baldwin area, and I'm here today with the Campbell family from Robertsdale. Recently, brothers Bruce Campbell and George Campbell, also known as Uncle George, have passed away and left us. And I was recently at Uncle George's funeral, and I just heard all the wonderful stories about his life and his brother's life and the impact that they have made on the central Baldwin area. And I wanted to be sure that we did not lose these stories. And so I am here today with Ruthie Campbell, and I am here with her son, Kyle Irwin. So tell me a little bit about him growing up here in Robertsdale and what Robertsdale really means to you. And I know that you serve on the city council, and so I know that Robertsdale is having their centennial celebration, and I know that they would have been thrilled to have been able to have been a part of that. But tell me a little bit about some of these photos that we're looking at here and what that means to you.
This is a picture of George and Bruce Campbell and their father, Bill Campbell. Bill Campbell moved here in December of 1920 at the age of 9 years old with his mother and father and his 7 other siblings. The following February of 1921, Robertsdale became a township. So my family moved here before Robertsdale was a town. In the mid-1930s, my granddaddy purchased a home on the corner of College Avenue and East Silver Hill Avenue in Robertsdale, and both George and Bruce were born in the home. Uncle George, November 30th of 1940, and Bruce, my daddy with the blonde hair, December 12th of 1942. They lived there for the next 6 years. So by July 1946, my grandfather had built the red brick 2-story home on Highway 59, and that summer, July of 1946, this picture was made out in front of the home. This is the house that they moved to in 1946, the 2-story red brick home that sits where now is the Waffle House in Robertsdale on Highway 59, and this land out from it was part of the farm that my granddaddy had that he farmed, which also encompassed over where Robertsdale High School is located at this time. This picture on the top left is the first Robertsdale United Methodist Church in Robertsdale, and it was organized in 1921. When my grandfather, Bill Campbell, did come, this is the first church that they attended. So he attended the church before it was organized as well. Below and to the side are certificate of baptism and membership of the church for George and Bruce, as both of them entered that part of their lives through the church. And these are the documents. This picture is pictures of ponies that George and Bruce had that their Uncle Jim Campbell gave them when they were 10 and 12 years old. Uncle George, again at 12 years old, rode Floyd, and he was one-eyed, and you really had to watch him, Uncle George said. But in front is my daddy, Bruce, who was only 10, and his horse's name was Fanny, and he would make her rear up. So at 10 years old, here he is, already wanting to be a cowboy. This picture was taken in the pasture by the red brick home, which again would be on the land where Robertsdale High School is presently. Alrighty, this is a picture of Uncle George's Robertsdale High School graduating class, and he is right over in the top portion of the R, and this was how many students that they had to graduate, and this is how they used to take the graduation pictures of the group picture. This is a picture of Bruce, my daddy, at the Sweetheart Dance his senior year of 1961, and even though it's black and white, he had on a white sports coat and a pink carnation to go with the times with that song that was so popular. And here is the track team, and he's sitting right up front, right below. That was his favorite sport. This picture is the potato shed in Robertsdale on Highway 59, and it's where this particular picture is made of was during potato season. The harvesting of potatoes and the shipping on the potatoes on the railroad track was very large for this area, and my family were big potato farmers. My granddaddy worked this shed, and he had partnership in another shed that was next to this one that's shown in this picture, and Bruce and George both grew up on these sheds working them. There's an arrow pointing to Bruce standing as a teenager with his cowboy hat on, with his father Bill standing in front of him on the working potato shed. This particular picture depicts what the whole Campbell family was very involved in, which was the water. Several pictures that I have are taken at Pirates Cove, where Daddy, being Bruce, had his speedboat, George had his speedboat, my granddaddy had a shrimping boat, a small commercial shrimping boat, and every chance that they had, they were down in the water and would take us. This particular picture, we were shrimping in Pirates Cove and brought up loads and loads of shrimp, which you might can see in this picture. This is an early on picture of Uncle George in his early 20s on his horse Peanut, and he's over in Mobile at the Sheriff Posse's arena off on Moffett Road. He was there riding in events and calf roping. This is a picture of him on his horse Peanut just a few years later with little Ruthie, myself, as just a 2-year-old. He always did things with children, always had children around him and with him, always. His oldest working horse that he had since he was a teenager, that horse's name was Old Charlie, and he lived to be 34 years old in Uncle George's hands all his life and passed away here on the dairy farm. Best horse he ever had, rode many a kid, roped many a cattle. This horse's name was Goofy, another very strong quarter horse that he used whenever some of the big cattle, bulls especially, would get away from the stockyard or out from folks' pens that he would have to go and catch. He would use this horse because he could sure handle him. This is a picture of several horses, but it's showing 2 extra ones that he had, one being Roy and one being Penny. Penny foaled 5 colts here on the farm over all the years, which every single one of them was a cattle horse for Uncle George. This is a picture of a stock trailer that he purchased. He was in his 30s when he purchased this, and it had 3 sections to it, with the 4th section being the end of the stock trailer, and he could haul many a cattle and did all over the county and outside of the county and cross state lines for folks, delivering cattle and taking them to different stockyards for customers. This is a picture of George on his last cattle horse that he had. Horse's name was Bo. He belonged to Neil McMillan from Stockton. He and Uncle George were very close lifetime friends. Bo lived a long life and caught many a cattle for Uncle George as well. This picture is a stock trailer that Uncle George purchased just a few years back, and he has his 2 nephews with him, and they were going to catch cattle that day. He was aggravated that we were taking this picture, and you can see he's trying to talk to me to tell me to hurry. But on Uncle George's left-hand side is Kyle. On the right-hand side is Quinn Campbell. This is the Mobile Bay Monthly Magazine, November 2008, and Uncle George was interviewed by one of their reporters for his roots that he has here in Robertsdale. And the story went on, starting at his pasture, moved on to a section where his horse is out in the pasture, beautiful setting. From here, up on the catwalk at the stockyard, to in the ring at the stockyard, and Uncle George is standing over the controls. And in this write-up, they're talking about the hundreds of thousands of cattle that over the years that came through the stockyard, and he was there on day 1, and he was there on the last day for the last cattle to be sold. Uncle George was a lifetime member of the Baldwin County Cattlemen and was a board member for many of the years. This particular picture is made through the Baldwin County Cattlewomen, where he was named Honorary Father of the Year, year 2000, along with Mary Lois Childress, who was honored as Mother of the Year. This photo of Uncle George is one of a kind. He's at the top And beside him is Henry Walton, who was 17 years the dairy foreman of our barn here in Robertsdale, of our dairy farm. Mr. Henry Walton knew everything there was to know about cattle or any kind of animals. Worked his last days at the Robertsdale feed store with folks coming for all the remedies to ask questions about for all their animals. And here on the left, bottom left, is Mr. J.W. Clark, who was very essential in starting the Baldwin County Cattlemen here in Robertsdale for our building, the very first building we had here in Robertsdale, and at the ballpark here in Robertsdale, the ladies' softball field is named in his honor, the J.W. Clark Field. And on the bottom is Mr. John Lassiter, a lifelong Robertsdale Elsinore resident who purchased the feed store from Mr. J.W. Clark whenever he sold it. The following is some equipment that Bruce had. He loved to play with his toys, and they were all very big, expensive toys. After they sold the dairy barn, this was one of the things that Daddy had purchased and had worked, a big boom truck, and he had this big record truck, a drag line as well. Here, a big bean truck was stuck in the field, and this field is the same property that the Baldwin County Coliseum sits on now. This was his track hoe. This picture is also on the property where the Baldwin County Coliseum is presently. This is a picture of he on his bulldozer, and he's talking to his daddy, my granddaddy, Bill Campbell, who had walked up to tell him something while working. This is a picture of a log splitter that he built from the ground up in his spare time. With this log splitter, he could split any size wood that you could bring to him. This picture is a picture of one of these large trees that's cut, and to show the size, he sat on it holding his saw while they're winching it up to that log splitter to cut. This is a closer up picture of the hydraulics that are pushed out as they are splitting some wood, and whenever they would get these big pieces, they would cut them close, and there was a winch that was welded onto this log splitter, and they would pull the winch out, and the winch would pick up these large pieces of wood and put on this log splitter, and he would cut anything that you needed him to cut. This is Uncle George's last cowboy hat that he wore for many years. He never walked out of the house without his cowboy hat on. Long live cowboys. We're thankful to have this in our family. This was our final picture that we took for the Robertsdale United Methodist Church's pictorial directory. On your left is Bruce, on your right is George. Myself, I'm in the middle, and on the bottom left is Kyle, and on the bottom right is Carissa. Robertsdale means everything to me. Again, as our family has been here for 101 years, this year then in 2021 is our centennial. It just warms my heart to think that we do have that kind of history in our family. My daddy and Uncle George participated in all the Baldwin County fairs that came every year whenever they were young coming up. And Bruce, my daddy, had a grand champion dairy bull one year his high school year, and it was a big bull, and it came right from our dairy, one that was used as a working cattle on our dairy. And so as far as Bruce goes, my daddy, he whenever he was in high school, he was very active in high school in several different clubs, and he was also the most athletic in his senior year. He and Miss Carolyn Sellers, one of his very dear friends, lifetime very dear friends, and he ran track at Robertsdale High School. But the exciting, important fact about track, he started track at Robertsdale High School. And he has a very dear friend, Harry White, who continues today to still get the class reunion together. Every year they have a small little lunch somewhere, and they still gather.
I'm Harry White. I'm a classmate of Bruce Campbell from the class of 1961. I go back to probably our sophomore year with Bruce, as he really wanted to put together a track field team at Robertsdale High School, and he was really a pain. There was no stopping Bruce. He wanted to have a track team, And every day, I mean, he was hitting us on the shoulder and us going, and let's go run. I played football with Bruce, and after football practice, Bruce still wanted to go run. And so this went on, until our senior year, when we actually had a formal track team, the first one ever at Robertsdale High School. And Bruce Campbell was the first one in our class, and probably the only one in our class, who ever had a pair of real track shoes. And Bruce went out and bought himself a pair of track shoes with the steel spikes and all that kind of stuff. The rest of the team was running around in old beat up sneakers, just trying to keep shoes on our feet. But Bruce had real track shoes, and he was really proud of that. And Bruce was good. Bruce was a good runner, and that's all Bruce wanted to do was to run. Played football with him through our senior year. Just nothing but great experience with Bruce Campbell, other than the fact that he was 100 miles an hour all the time. When Bruce was walking slowly, we were all running to catch up, because that's just the way Bruce was. And so in honor of Bruce Campbell, when we did our 60th anniversary this past year, our class, because Bruce had passed away, our class donated a book to Robertsdale High School, and it was a pictorial history of track and field. And inside is a nice picture of Bruce with a nice inscription that dedicates this book to Bruce Campbell, and we honored Bruce as the primary catalyst for establishment of track and field at Robertsdale High School. And it has a couple of really nice pictures in it, and I'm hoping that Robertsdale High School students are getting some benefit from this book. Hey, the one thing I can say about Bruce Campbell was he was always running, even when he was sitting still. He just never, ever, ever was satisfied unless he was moving hard. He was always pushing us to get better and more dedicated to track and field. Most of us, all we want to do is go home and do our chores. Bruce wanted to run.
My name is Walter Lowry, and I'm here to tell a few memories I have of Bruce Campbell. He was a little bit older than I was back in the 1960s. He graduated in 1961, I graduated in 1965. It was a 4-year lap in between us, but he used to come out to our PE class when I was at PE, and I noticed what great shape he was in. He always ran. He come out there and I think the classes lasted for 60 minutes, and he would run the whole 60 minutes. He lapped, and we would try to run with him, but he ran so fast we couldn't keep up with him. We were 8th graders. We couldn't keep up with him because he was so fast. And then sometimes out there we'd play touch football. It was called two-hand touch back then. It wasn't flag football, it was two-hand touch. And he was just so fast, we couldn't even catch him. And that's my memory of him, is what great a shape he was in. He had 6-pack abs. He could run forever. And I never really saw him play football that much, but I know he was a good football player. And that's about it. That's the memories I have of him.
And back in those days, there was only 4 high schools, to my knowledge.
There was
Robertsdale, Foley, Fairhope, and
Bay Minette,
also known as Baldwin County High School.
I've had the privilege of working with a super nice gentleman in Foley, Mr. Claude Lipscomb. And one of the cool stories he always talks about, Mr. Claude ran track at Foley. And he would always talk about the competitor that Bruce was on the track field, I guess you'd say it. But, he talks about some of the talk that Bruce would say before the race. He'd let folks know that he was going to win, he was going to beat you. And I remember all the stories that he would tell me, about winning and racing and running, and you wonder, sure, they're real, but sometimes I'll stretch a story for my son to let him know that Dad's the hero. But to hear Mr. Claude tell it, you know that he was a competitor, he was an athlete, and, he competed to win. So that was cool to hear, from somebody else other than just from the family or or from the folks here in Robertsdale, a competitor of his from when we all know Foley's a rival school of Robertsdale's or sports.
And still is.
And still is.
And you know, with that said, Mr. Walter Lowry here in Robertsdale was just a couple years younger than my daddy in school, and he ran track. And he would stop by to visit him in his last days and visit him some, he and Uncle George. And he would talk to Daddy about racing. And even though Daddy was very dementia related at that point, Daddy could still talk about the track. And Mr. Walter Lowry would get all excited and talk and laugh, and Daddy would too. And it was as if he remembered everything. And Mr. Walter would talk about the same things that Kyle just said. Mr. Claude Lipscomb in Foley would talk about, but here and on the same team as Daddy. But that was his life. And I think back to whenever I always knew that they would talk about he would run from his house as a little fella all the way over to the dairy barn and then run to help gather up the cows while everybody else had horses.
And just hearing these stories, it makes me think that, he probably didn't have those hours of training that some young folks are able to do, and he got his training working.
Yeah, working.
Yep.
Working.
I can understand that. Yes,
Working.
absolutely.
Well, he played football as well in high school. He was a fullback, and he loved sports. It didn't matter what it was. He loved sports. Daddy had an airboat before airboats were popular. It was in the mid-'70s that he and his two best friends, Herman Murphy and Ernest Middleton, they all got together and started talking about this thing, the airboats. And so Daddy got an airboat, Mr. Murphy and Mr. Ernest, and so they would go up in the Delta. And they did this a lot. And then he finally started taking, us, the family and friends up in the Delta. But Daddy liked to take a whole group. So he had two airboats at this point, and again, we're still in the 70s, and he fiberglassed and made one big, larger, and it would take 11 people out, including he, and then the two where the bench was right below him that would sit. Then there was the rest of us were sitting around on the edge of the boat, and we had a lot of fun. We just spotted alligators and frogs. Big
frogs.
Yes, big frogs. During the days whenever we would go spotting alligators and catching frogs, the state of Alabama learned through the grapevine that Daddy, could do all these things. But they called him one day, and they asked him, would he be the Alabama alligator nuisance control man for the year? He had to go out and get bonded, and that's what he did. And so from, the top of the county, up Little River and Perdita, all the way down to Ono Island and around the Floribama, they had some up and down the causeway. Mm-hmm. All up and down Fairhope, especially because a lot of dogs in the yards, and a lot of gators will come up. And he got calls left and right. He'd come off the combine or off the tractor to have to go run and get that alligator. He wasn't so happy in those days because whenever he got on that combine, when he got on the machinery, it was Katie barred the door to finish, and he would relocate those animals to the Gulf Shore Zoo and to different places. But he caught alligators, one as large as 12 foot long.
Wow.
And he built cages. That they, and then put meat in to lure them in, and he would catch them that way. He got bit by a moccasin on his hand when he was out at the state park one year, out whenever they were just only so deep, but he was trying to put a trap out for an alligator, and he got bit, and he made it through that.
I'm sure he was calm because that demeanor that he had.
Well, this is Bruce.
Oh, it's Bruce.
Yeah,
Bruce. Okay, all right. I got him backwards.
Completely opposite from George.
Okay. If it had been George, I could just see George being like, okay.
Yeah, Bruce was very high-strung and very always go, work, and he lived it, breathed it and lived it hard. Uncle George as well, but as Kyle said, his demeanor was so much more patient and peaceful, where Bruce's was not. A lot of times, Uncle George liked to sit and talk about the days that he was a movie star, and when Steven Spielberg came down to Bay Minette and filmed the portion of the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, he had some cattlemen and cattle on this part of the moving picture, and the cowboys that are on their horses in this picture, there's an arrow pointing straight to a white cowboy hat, and that was Uncle George. He was on his horse Peanut, and they had a big time while they were filming this movie, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, one of his prestige stories he loved to tell. He also took a car shell, and with the engine, he ended up building a big lawnmower, almost like a bush hog.
Wow.
And under it had a bigger blade than a lawnmower. And he would ride in that car and cut grass in the yard.
You have a photo of that.
I do have a photo of that in the yard that we're sitting on now, and including his house, which is just over from this house, just over on this side of the yard, and cut grass. And so that was really neat. I do have a photo. And another little neat tidbit, this home here that we're sitting in, my granddaddy built in 59, and he built Daddy's house in 57.
Okay.
And the knotty wood pine that's on the wall came from the cypress swamp just down at the tree line, just out the back door. And Papa had it all cut and lumbered right here, and when they built the house.
Wow. There are just some absolutely great stories that need to be preserved. And is there just anything else that either one of you want to talk about? You know, I don't think that we should not talk about the rodeo, because that part is just, I know Kyle's already mentioned a little bit about it. Well, tell me about when Kyle made it to the rodeo circuit, and we know we're so proud to have a famous guy like that from this area, because when he mentioned a while ago, he was talking about all the rodeoing that goes on out west, and we're so happy to have a Campbell legacy right here from Baldwin County. But tell me about the pride that was instilled inside your daddy and Uncle George whenever they got to go see Kyle.
I think I'll kind of steal this question from her. For me, you know, it was always the outside looking in. You know, I'd always heard the story. I was the grandson. I was the great nephew. And I'll have a lot of friends out west, you know, and they always ask me, ain't no cowboys in Alabama, you know. But what folks don't understand, and this will go back to the stockyard days of the farming, you could see in their eye when they could watch me compete, or even, I never will forget the first time I went and caught a loose cow with Uncle George. A lady caught him. We were in Foley, and I had just got a horse broke, and it was my first horse to ever break. Uncle George helped me break him, and he got a call to catch a yearling that had got out in Foley. And he said, "You want to make some money?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "All right." He said, "I'll let you, this will be your first one, but I'll go with you." And we have a picture of him on his horse, a bay horse he called Bo, and I had a paint horse and I called him Rowdy. And we went to the place, and Uncle George set the scene for me. I never will forget pulling up, you know, all the instructions he gave me, because this animal needs to get back to these people alive and well, so that, you know, they have because that's money, you know, food, whatever. And then due to the danger of the situation, or Uncle George having to stop what he did, it was a job. You know, it was business. And so I remember him setting the scene for me before we got there, and what I needed to do, how patient I needed to be. But when the time was right, you had to go to get him roped before he got to the road where you have traffic, cars, you know. And so, and sure enough, this don't happen very often out in the pasture, but it only took me one loop. I got the calf caught. We got him loaded and got him back, and the lady paid Uncle George, and he turned around and handed it to me. And I never will forget that. But when he got to watch me compete, you know, in the rodeo was based off displaying what you do on the ranch every day. Rodeo was based off displaying the bronc riding is, you know, breaking and training young horses. The calf roping is roping the calf and tying him down so he can't hurt you while you doctor him, like I talked about they did in the dairy. And so when they got to watch me compete, you know, a little bit of it for me was they were getting to see them do it again. You know, they were getting to see the skills that they had taught me, because my granddaddy, even though, like Mom said, he was farming and mechanicking, he knew his way around cattle. He knew his way around horses. Wasn't quite as patient around the cattle as Uncle George was, but he knew it. And for them to get to watch me, and then to go forth, and for the past 10 years I've been able to make a good living rodeoing. I think it was something special to them, because they got to see almost like their own son, you know, competing, and the talents that they taught me. Because every day I was with them. I was either with Papa welding or learning how to fix something, or with Uncle George treating maybe a sick calf, or putting out hay, you know, or feeding them or whatnot. So when they got to watch me do that, it was pretty neat. You could almost see them reliving it through me. And I never will forget the first year that I made the national finals. There's less than 10 people from the state of Alabama that have ever made the national finals. And in my event, steer wrestling, there's only 2 other guys. One's name is Bill Pace. He's from Montgomery. He knows the Campbell very well. He knows Robertsville very well. He lives in Texas now, and he keeps up with me. And the other one is Victor Deck, and he's from Summerdale, Alabama.
Yep.
Still, once again, Bill Pace and Victor Deck, both of those guys, very familiar with the Campbell family. Victor was a dear friend of my mom, still is, and my granddaddy knew him very well, his whole life. But Bo, who learned through George, had a lot to do with their steer wrestling and teaching them and growing up. And I remember hearing Bill Pace say one time that Bo Campbell's done more for steer wrestling in the Southeast than a lot of people have. And Bo learned that from George. So to watch it get passed down and now to me, and to be able to qualify for the national finals, that's huge. Like I said, less than 10 people have ever done it. Nobody from the state of Alabama has ever won a world's championship rodeoing. That was one of my goals. There's a gentleman from Clanton, Alabama, Nelson White, who's qualified this year in the team roping. And he'll get to go and try for a world's championship. So how cool would that be? But in 2014 was my first year qualifying, and Uncle George was starting to have a few health problems. And everybody talked, because it had been since Victor in 96 and 97 was the last years that he had made the national finals. So, we're talking 12, 15 years since anybody from the area had represented us in Alabama. And in the grand entry every night, we run out and I hold the Alabama flag. You carry the flag that you're from the state that you're from. And I remember with Uncle George, with his health issues and whatnot, I asked Mom, I said, don't bring him to Vegas. It's quite a trip. Don't bring him. I had to fly out. We're in Las Vegas for 2 weeks when we're there for the finals. And I remember saying, because he wanted to go, but he knew that he wasn't maybe going to get to go because, it's a lot. And it really is. And Vegas isn't just the easiest to get around either. And I remember I asked Mom, don't bring him. Not that I don't want him there, because I do, but I didn't want it to be a lot on him or a lot on her. And she flew out a few days after the finals had already started.
3 days after.
And I had done well. I had won a round. The next night won another round. I had jumped up in the spotlight had a chance to win the world championship. And I was just a kid. I didn't know. I knew what I was doing, but I didn't know the stage. I was just having fun. And I remember Mom told me, she said, hey, we made it. We were staying at the Mirage in Las Vegas. She said, hey, we've landed and we're at the Mirage. We're down here eating. And she asked me, she said, you want to come down and meet us? And I had to go sign autographs or do something for one of my sponsors. I said, sure, I'll swing by and see you on my way out. And as I walked around the corner, I seen that wheelchair. And before I saw it was on George, I knew what she had done. And at first I kind of wanted to be a little, but 2 nights later, I was fortunate enough to win a round again, and I got to take on George on the stage and held the buckle, and it was so neat because we wheeled him up in his wheelchair up on the stage, and we all got behind him. We have a picture of that too. But it was so cool to see the smile on his face, and just the joy. So I am glad that she brought him, and he got to see that and experience it, because if not, we're watching it at home from TV. But to be able to see the rodeo of that magnitude, that's the Super Bowl of rodeo. It really is. And for him to get to see it and to get to watch me have success in the heat of the moment, that put the icing on the cake, I guess, for me. And so I'm glad that he got to experience it. And like your question, him getting to see me do that, that was awesome, because that's something that, every cowboy always dreams of getting to do and to go to that level. So.
Well, just listening to you talk, I know it must have meant the world to him. And I'm sure that, for those of us who've had to deal with loved ones that experience health issues and dementia and things like that, I do know my mom suffers from dementia. There's things that come back.
Oh, yeah.
They drift in and out. And I'm sure any time that memory was able to cross by, I just know he was filled with pride. And that was just probably the highlight of his later years is being to see their legacy lived out through you.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. One of the things I really touched on at his funeral And we always would joke, me and Uncle George would, Mr. Ben Castleberry owned some property in Summerdale. And Uncle George, ever since I can remember, has helped Mr. Ben and looked after his cattle. He always said he was a herdsman. I said, "What's that, Uncle George?" He said, "I help people take care of their cattle." And he always, he would laugh and joke, "What you gonna say at my funeral?" He'd always say, And but one of the things I really touched on there, and this is just the God's honest truth, horses and the love that he had for horses. And like you said, the things that helped bring that back for those guys, it was always horses and cattle for Uncle George. It always was. And I think that's God letting us know he's got a way, of everything's all right. But watching him watch a horse, watching him watch a cow, one of the greatest cutters in the United States of America lives in Summerall, Alabama. His name's Austin Shepard.
Yeah, right down the road from me.
And I remember Uncle George working for his dad, Mr. Sam Shepard, when they had the place in Magnolia Springs. And just somebody of that multitude, somebody in Mr. Austin's line of work doesn't hire somebody to work for them unless they know what they're doing. And it's unique to hear Mr. Austin share some stories about Uncle George, because Austin has been to the 4-6 ranches in Texas, which is the largest ranch in Texas, one of the oldest ranches. A lot of people maybe watching this film would know what it was about. Buster Barton, one of the greatest cutters to ever evolve the sport through the 40s, 50s, and 60s, knew good horses and knew cattle, and Austin is around those type of people. And for him to come back and in Robertsdale to hire someone like my Uncle George to do his work for him when he's gone, he knew that George had an eye for cattle. He knew that George knew what he was doing. So that was always special to me, because like I said, when my buddies out west, ain't no cowboys in Alabama. Well, little do they know, and one of the greatest ones in my eyes, or the greatest one in my eyes, trained me. So that's something that'll always be special to me.
Well, I am so thankful that we were able to share some of the history, and we really like to do living history, but because both of those have passed away within the last year, we're hopefully that the people that get to watch this living history video, we don't have Bruce and we don't have George here, but we have the two best representatives that I believe we could get. And before we wrap this up, is there anything else that we've missed that you guys want to share with us, just about Bruce and George, but also what the Campbell family means to this area?
I do. Uncle George, back on Uncle George, there was a time over the years after the interstate went straight through, and then we still have the transfer trucks to turn over and with cattle. Every time they would turn over with cattle for all the years, they would call Uncle George, and he would have Bo, who he talked about, the cousin in Rosington, and all the cousins would grab their horses and load them up and go straight over to, and would round up the cows. They were all up and down Government Street, all everywhere, and some everywhere. And so they would herd them up and get them, and then bring them back here to the sale in Robertsdale to let them rest, relax.
Was this the old Bankhead, or was it the old Bankhead tunnel?
The old Bankhead tunnel.
Gotcha.
And the trucks would turn all the time in that tunnel. They still will turn in the Wallace tunnel. They still turn over, but they would go and they would round them up, and they would have already ran way down the causeway all over, and they would get them up. Our sheriff now, Hoss Mack, talked about at the funeral when he was a little boy. He lived on Highway 59, and he went to walk to school one day, and he walked out of his front door and was walking down Highway 59 to head towards Robertsdale High School. And he looks up, and here comes a horse cantering down 59, and it's Uncle George. And a cow had got out from the sale barn, and had ran across 59, from the stockyard, ran across 59 on the east side of 59, and so he was tearing out after him. And he watched him catch up to him and rope him. And then others come as they, brought a truck and trailer to load him and take him back. And he said, what a day to walk to school and what a sight to see.
I can only imagine. You know what, you just brought up a little bit of memory that I had. Growing up, I grew up in the little town of Summerdale, and we didn't grow up on a farm, but we'd always have a horse or something. And so my brother, he just had to have him a couple cows, and one of them got out one day, and we couldn't get that cow. He was down in off of 71. We called it the old trestle, where the little I guess, little creek there, and that cow was out in the middle. We just didn't know what to do with that cow. And somebody said, well, you got to call a cowboy. You got to call George Campbell. And he came down in that little flatbed white. Wasn't that his truck?
Yes.
And I was like, wow, that is a real cowboy, you know? And it was like, sure enough, he knew exactly what to do to get that horse. And, you know, us, we didn't know what to do with that horse, but he knew. And hearing you tell that story, I'm sure there are stories all over this county of people in similar situations. But for years after that, I would see him in that white pickup flatbed Ford truck, and I'm like, that's a real cowboy.
Another instance that my cousin A.C. Campbell told me about, they through the sheriff's department as the posse. Uncle George got a phone call one day from over Mississippi across the line, and there was a big drug raid at some big dairy farm. And they called Uncle George and said, come and bring the trucks and as many trailers as you can, because we're going to give these dairy cows to you. We don't know what to do with them. This was back in the late 60s, very early 70s. So I guess they just didn't take them to the cellar anywhere, but they called Uncle George, and here they all lined up, and again, Bo and Rudy and other families. And when they drove up, there was people everywhere that was handcuffed, all from this drug raid, and there was a load of dairy cows.
Wow.
And so they loaded all of them up, and the deputies thanked them for, you know, having that much off their hands. And Uncle George said, boys, this is where we're going to take them. And they drove them all right back and followed him to Rosington to a family that had a dairy farm that could take them on, and he just gave them all the cattle for their dairy.
What amazing stories. And I guess we'll wrap this up. And guys, this was so enlightening to me, and I really hope that those who get to enjoy this living history video of Bruce and George Campbell, and just all about the Campbell family here in central Baldwin County, and of course, I just might as well say Robertsdale.
That's right.
That's right. The hub city.
That's right.
The hub city of Baldwin County.
That's
so
right.
Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.